I just want to thank the choir for bringing William Blake's words so beautifully into the sanctuary. That is one of my favorite poems, and to hear your rendition was really exquisite. And William Blake, thanks you. Well, welcome to welcome to welcome to KUUF Unitarian Universalist Fellowship's first ever favorite poem service. I've been doing this service at Quimper for about 17 years. It's a joyous celebration of an art form called poetry. And what this gathering celebrates is the presence of poetry in our lives and how specific poems can touch certain lives in profound, persistent, and sometimes mysterious ways. And I also want to let you know on the front end that some poems are soft like a whisper, and some howl with rage, and some are bright with glory. And this service is a deeply intimate service where our fellow members and friends stand publicly before you and say, listen to this. Now that exchange is one of the most fundamental weaves within any community, the voicing of something held dear and the attentive, respectful listening. Now it can be an intimate and it can also be a vulnerable moment. And it reminds me of this aphorism by the poet Antonio Porchia. Quote, "I know what I have given. I don't know what you have received." Now what this service... Are there squirrels on the roof? That's fantastic. So what this service intends to give is one of the greatest gifts that we human beings have ever created. Every reason in the world to gather together and to pay attention here, now, to what our neighbors and friends consider important. So this state of being together in slower, sacred time, attentive time, is becoming rarer and rarer in today's blistering paced world. So let us this morning savor our time together. And savor is a verb, and to savor takes practice. So welcome to the practice of savoring. So I also want to thank each and every one of our readers this morning, especially those who are stretching themselves to do something to nourish their community. And I also want to bow to the listeners in the room, because readers and musicians and listeners, together we are the lifeblood of poetry, of music, and of community. And finally, two favors this morning. First, as the listeners, you are invited to open yourself to laughter, to tears, to insight, to delight, to the musicality of language that you may not understand, and to, of course, poetic ambiguity. I think we Unitarian Universalists who don't live in a black and white world can really appreciate poetic ambiguity. And second, and this is a big favor, within this worship service this morning, please refrain from clapping, from slapping your palms together. Please don't do that, especially after the readings. There is a way to applaud and to show your appreciation without slapping your palms together, and that's going like this. And so, to show our appreciation, but we're going to break our own rule very early in the morning because poets love to break rules. We are going to slap our palms together in about 5 seconds. So, all the readers, if you would please stand at this point, if you would face the congregation, and congregation, if you would be so kind to slap your palms together really loud. Thank you. One final note, there will not be introductions before each poem, before each reader. All the poems, all the poets, all the readers are listed in your order of service, and we're just going to transition from one reader to another without an interlude. And so without further ado, I call forth our first reader.
Many years ago, I had an experience that completely altered the way that I look at life. I was a concrete facts-only person. There's a rational explanation for everything that happens in the world. To see the world in a grain of sand? What a ridiculous concept. I considered most poetry as fuzzy-brained, esoteric scribbles. Then, at a week-long retreat with fellow UUs from around the district, I had what might be called a religious experience, an epiphany, an awakening. Not believing in what seemed irrational, I sought to understand what had happened. I turned to the poets. I understood the poets. I learned from the poets. I found answers in poetry. There is the non-rational world for which we do not know what the explanation is. And now, one of my favorite poems is Blake's To See the World in a Grain of Sand. So thank you, choir, for singing that. My very favorite poem is by E.E. Cummings, who was a Unitarian. It reminds me that each day is a gift, that we are part of an interdependent web, and that we are surrounded by that mysterious energy of the cosmos that feels like love, that some call God. I thank you, God, for this amazing day, for the leaping green spirits of trees and the blue true dream of sky, and for everything which is natural, which is infinite, which is yes. I, who have died, am alive again today. And this is the sun's birthday. This is the birth day of the sun, of life and love and wings, and of the gay great happening illimitably earth. How should tasting, touching, hearing, seeing, breathing any, lifted from the know of all nothing, human, merely being doubt unimaginable you? Now the ears of my ears are open, awake, and now the eyes of my eyes are open.
When I realized I was going to have to choose a poem, I started looking through all my books of poetry, and I read this one and that one, and none of them struck me quite right. And then I was sitting in my living room, and I looked up on the wall where I have a picture of some trees and a poem along with it. And I thought, oh, of course, for me, that is the poem. I think that I shall never see a poem as lovely as a tree whose hungry mouth is pressed against the earth's sweet flowing breast, a tree that looks at God all day and lifts her leafy arms to pray, a tree that may in summer wear a nest of robins in her hair, upon whose bosom snow has lain, who intimately lives with rain. Poems are made by fools like me, but only God can make a tree.
This poem is one that I've read many, many, many times. And I first found it in a book that I got when I was 6 years old. Book of children's poems, though some of which I would say weren't exactly for children. But this one is also one that has inspired many of my own poetry. The Jabberwocky. 'Twas brillig in the slithy toves, did gyre and gimble in the wave. All mimsy were the borogoves, in the momrass outgrave. Beware the Jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the Jub-Jub bird, and shun the frumious Bandersnatch. He took his vorpal sword in hand, long time the maxome foe he sought. So rested he by the Tum-Tum tree, and stood awhile in thought. And as in uffish thought he stood, the Jabberwock with eyes of flame came whiffling through the tulgey wood, and burbled as it came. 1, 2, 1, 2, and through the vorpal blade went snicker-snack, and with its head he left it dead, and went glumping back. And hast thou slain the Jabberwock? Come to my arms, my beamish boy. O frabjous-day, calloo-callay, he chortled in his joy. 'Twas brillig in the slithy toves, did gyre and gimble in the wave. All mimsy were the borogoves, in the momrass outgrave.
I've loved to read since I first learned how. I was the one reading in the dark, in the bathroom, riding in the car, alone in my room. Poetry was not really my thing. But then I moved here from Guam to attend the UW and to be closer to my family. I studied Shakespeare that first quarter and was surprised how much I loved the richness and depth of his creativity. His word choices and poetic rhythms were magnetic. I worked hard for the 4.0 grade and decided Shakespeare was the first person I wanted to meet in heaven. Today I read a few lines from Romeo and Juliet. First, you'll hear Romeo talk to himself about Juliet, his newfound love. Then Juliet speaks, unaware that Romeo is listening. But soft, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. Two of the fairest stars in all the heaven, having some business, do entreat her eyes to twinkle in their spheres till they return. The brightness of her cheek would shame those stars as daylight doth a lamp. Her eyes in heaven would through the airy region stream so bright that birds would sing and think it were not night. See how she leans her cheek upon her hand. Oh, that I were a glove upon that hand, that I might touch that cheek. Oh, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? Deny thy father and refuse thy name. Or if thou wilt not, be but sworn my love, and I'll no longer be a Capulet. 'Tis but thy name that is my enemy. Thou art thyself, though not a Montague. What's Montague? It is nor hand, nor foot, nor arm, nor face, nor any other part belonging to a man. Oh, be some other name. What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Romeo, doff thy name, and for that name which is no part of thee, take all myself.
I was often told when I was growing up and into adulthood that I was too sensitive, too emotional, too quiet, too shy, too something. And this poem gave me a sense that there were others who maybe felt the world as deeply as I did, that cared deeply, that loved completely, and I had a sense of being gotten. It meant a lot to know that someone ached also for what I ached for myself and others, just to be real, to not be alone with the thoughts and pain of life. And this poet was asking the question I wanted to know: if people could sit with my pain and their own. I was tired of being told to cheer up and be given advice when I didn't want it, of being reassured. I just wanted to be gotten how in this moment, how I felt, and not be told to change. When my loved ones were struggling with all kinds of things, health issues, depression, suicidal thoughts even, this poem reminded me what I wanted to do was to get up after a night of grief, of despair, and be able to do what needed to be done. It came at a time in my life where I was trying to learn how to be present to all of life, even when it was hard, and still say yes. It helped me remember the miracle of life and what really matters. That what's important is sharing our human experience with each other, listening deeply, sitting with ourselves and others in joy and sorrow, and in trusting in that huge power of love and presence. This is The Invitation by Oriah Mountain Dreamer. It doesn't interest me what you do for a living. I want to know what you ache for, and if you dare to dream of meeting your heart's longing. It doesn't interest me how old you are. I want to know if you will risk looking like a fool for love, for your dream, for the adventure of being alive. It doesn't interest me what planets are squaring your moon. I want to know if you have touched the center of your own sorrow, if you have been opened by life's betrayals, or have become shriveled and closed from fear of further pain. I want to know if you can sit with my pain or your own without moving to hide it, or fade it, or fix it. I want to know if you can be with joy, mine or your own, if you can dance with the wildness and let the ecstasy fill you to the tips of your fingers and toes without cautioning us to be careful, to be realistic, to remember the limitations of being human. It doesn't interest me if the story you are telling me is true. I want to know if you can disappoint another to be true to yourself. If you can bear the accusation of betrayal and not betray your own soul. If you can be faithless and therefore trustworthy. I want to know if you can see beauty even when it is not pretty every day. And if you can source your own life from its presence. I want to know if you can live with failure, yours and mine, and still stand at the edge of the lake and shout to the silver of the full moon, yes. It doesn't interest me to know where you live or how much money you have. I want to know if you can get up after the night of grief and despair, weary and bruised to the bone, and do what needs to be done to feed the children. It doesn't interest me who you know or how you came to be here. I want to know if you will stand in the center of the fire with me and not shrink back. It doesn't interest me where or what or with whom you have studied. I want to know what sustains you from the inside when all else falls away. I want to know if you can be alone with yourself and if you truly like the company you keep in the empty moments.